To the 6th Comic-Con hosted at Syracuse University that we affectionately call the CripCon. And Cripping the Comic-Con is the only symposium of its kind as far as we know. We are very happy that you are here with us to break secular and spirited, perhaps spiritual bread, and to create a space together in which disability is front and center. As noted in our materials, our biannual symposium provides participants with the opportunity to engage in a broad array of reflective discussions about the representations of disability that exist beneath the surface and explicitly within mainstream popular cultures, both nationally and internationally, particularly the popular culture phenomena that are comic books, graphic novels, and manga. And we have on our panel today some of the most distinguished people in that movement, and I want to start by acknowledging them with a round of applause in whatever way you want to express that. Yeah, I'm going to need a glass of water for sure. That would be great. Thank you. All right then. So comic books, graphic novels, and manga don't always have consistent representations of disability in ways that we might find welcoming or positive, and we're trying to change that through this symposium and through multiple other ways on the planet, through the work of these 7 people and many of you in this room and beyond. So in our interactions and conversations, including in our quiet moments today, we have the opportunity to think and create interdependently about popular culture and the world around us. We have the opportunity as well to think about how disability is represented in comics, as I said, how comics might be increasingly accessible, including their adaptations in film and in other media, and how disabled folks are key contributors in the industry and in the artfulness of it all. We are all vital in these worlds that we co-create, the comics world and what some people call the real world. This year's theme, and justice for all, ? Highlights the ways in which justice remains contested terrain. What roles do and should disabled, deaf, autistic, neurodivergent, mad, emotionally variant, and crip folks play in these worlds? How are we welcomed and not welcomed? So speaking of welcome, and speaking not just verbally, since some of us use sign language to communicate, and some of us type to communicate, and some of us use all sorts of other ways of interacting. The remarks we're having right now together that I'm sharing with you and the panel that will follow in a moment, they're being live streamed for a local, national, and global audience, and we do this partly because of accessibility, of course. There are people who aren't able to be in the space either from around the corner or from around the world, and so we want them to be able to join us. We do have people here in that way. And at the conclusion of the panel, we'll have time for questions and discussion, including from the live stream chat interface, which we've set up with the help of many people. And before I introduce our panelists, I want to tell you briefly about Dylan Brandau. Dylan was a stalwart comics fan and lover of DC and Marvel movies who died suddenly of a medical condition at age 26 about a month ago on March 16th, the day before his favorite holiday. Dylan and his family and closest friends, what's happening? Feedback. So Dylan and his family and closest friends had plans on attending the New York Comic-Con in October. And I learned from his dear friend that they will get him a posthumous seat at the forthcoming Avengers movie. So he'll be there with them in spirit. And when they all attend that together, and also when they go to the New York Comic-Con in celebration of his life, that will still be happening. So Dylan's family and friends are here with us today, and I don't know if they're here in person, but I'm pretty sure they're here virtually. And he was an express technician at the Matthew Subaru dealership. And why am I telling you this story? I happen to take my car sometimes to the Matthew Subaru dealership in, nearby Binghamton, Vestal area. And here I am having this conversation while I'm waiting for them to do some work on my car, and I find out about this guy who loves comic books, who had a condition that recently killed him. And so I think to myself about how his death and his love of comics remind me that we're all connected and that I don't know why this is happening, but I'm going to try to deal with it. Is that less feedback? Is that better? Okay, sorry about that. So having heard this story about Dylan and meeting his family through this Comic-Con just a few days ago, still doing it, feedback, remind me yet again of how comics bring us together. So I wanted to have a moment of silence in remembrance of Dylan Brandau, if you would join me. Thank you. So yes, comics bring us together, even when justice seems just an aspiration. And like some argue, they do argue this, diversity is bad for comic books. Diversity is not something we should have in comic books. And I think this perspective is as far from the very point of this Comic-Con as a perspective could be. And so we press on, and here we are. So we have a very strong attention to access here. Obviously, you've probably noticed that there are vertical and horizontal communication badges. We've taken the time to think about having brailing on the coffee to distinguish between the decaf and the regular. We have iPads in the workshops that are artistically oriented so that people who use styluses and other means of access are not expected to use pens and pencils and more traditional artistic instruments. And so we definitely have a strong commitment to this, and we can have accessible communication badges for people who are visually impaired and blind and have low vision, because there are boundaries there. Like you shouldn't be brailing someone's communication badges, because then you'd have to touch them. Like that's not cool, like boundaries, right? So there are different ways we have to figure out how to interact with one another and be mindful of multiplicity. Gesundheit to the person who sneezed. Go in good health, that was Yiddish. So because it would take hours perhaps, I cannot thank every single person this morning who has made the Comic-Con possible. And we're working on a list that we'll be posting online, but I do want to make take a very specific moment to make very special thanks happen to all of our panelists, the workshop leaders, the vendors, the exhibitors, the featured artists, the volunteers, and you for being here in person and virtually. And specifically, though, I also want to thank Rachel Zubel-Ruggieri and Huey and Kate and Priya, all the students from the Beyond Compliance Coordinating Committee and the Disability Student Union, Elizabeth Sierra, who just started as the director of the Disability Cultural Center, who will continue in that role that I occupied for 7 years. And I don't think I actually introduced myself, which is very funny, but I'll do that in a minute. You're like, who is this person going on and on? I want to thank Sajida and Don, Jenny, Dale, Larry, Jason, Michael, Sanoop, Aileen, Helen, Karen, Ray, Jason R., Chris, Mark, and John from TGP Nominal, who will be podcasting this in the United Kingdom for the second time, and John will be here a little bit later. Ralph, Bridget, and all of our friends from Student Centers and Programming Services, Dave, Sarah, and everyone from Student Activities, Gufran, Kyle, Kate D., Leslie P., Colleen T., Chris W., Eleanor, and our entire interpreting team from Empire Interpreting, and thanks Terry Slater, Doreen Radin, our live captioner from Caption Advantage. I just gestured to the right at the frame screen, which has live captioning streaming on both sides. I also want to thank Shannon, Nicole, Joyce, Keith, Coran, Dion, and Lightning Lair, Heather, and the Copy Center in the Shine, the Copy Center known as Q's Copy Center, and Eric from All Event Entertainment, who will have an accessible photo booth from 2:30 to 6:30. So the panelists' bios are in your program. I will not extensively read them in the interest of time because we started a few minutes late, but I will make a couple of quick comments about each of them. But first I'll say who I am, because that seems like it might be a good idea. Nobody said, Diane, say something. Diane, say something. Who is that? So I'm Disheveled Diane. That's my nickname. I think someone's mic is being touched, maybe, is what's happening. Is someone wearing a lapel mic? I think if someone's wearing a lapel mic, and that's what the feedback is. Okay, so on the panel we have Lucy Wales, Jason Pittman, Georgia Weber, Jason Harris, Nancy Silberkleit, Keith Jones, and Leroy Moore from nearby and very far away. And once again, I'd like to give a big round of applause in however ways you wish and are able to express that to our 7 panelists who are here with us today. Thank you. I'm going to actually ask Ralph, who's here, to help me turn on this computer so I can show a slide or two if he's still in the vicinity. And if not, maybe one of our helpers can find him. Hi, Ralph. I've now outed you as Ralph. Ralph deserves lots of applause because he's been putting up with me for weeks and weeks. So let's applaud for Ralph, shall we? In whatever way you can. So I need to be able to open this so I can get the slides, and that's it. I'm not the person it thinks I am. All right, and then to make it turn on. So I should have started, and I apologize profusely. There we go. Takes a village. I should have started, and I apologize profusely, by acknowledging the Onondaga Nation, the ancestral lands on which we stand currently belong to the Onondaga Nation and to the Haudenosaunee, the firekeepers of the Onondaga Nation. So I apologize that I didn't begin with that. I was admittedly a little famished, you say in Yiddish, okay? There's a whole spectrum of dishevelment and discombobulation in Yiddish, which I'll explain later if anyone cares. So I'm Diane Weiner, and I started to say this before, and I'm a research professor in the Burton Blatt Institute and the founding director of the Disability Cultural Center. So the first question I have for the panelists, and we can handle this in any way you wish, and if people need assistance with accessing the microphones, we'll make that happen, of course, is I'd like you to comment, please, on how you first came to make a connection between disability and comics. So if you could comment, please, on how you first came to make a connection between disability and comics. Whoever wants to start.
I just have to first say Sam Wham Wow to everyone here at the CripCon, and to you, Diane, for putting comics into disabilities. But my background, I'm Nancy Silberkleit, co-CEO of Archie Comics. My background is a school teacher in Paramus, New Jersey, and we had a program for the autistic population. But what bothered me was that I still felt we weren't doing enough on having those students feel included. And how do you approach that conversation? And I think the only way to do that is to let your artist put the pencil to the paper, draw those pictures, because pictures are what engages one to expand the story in a way that they can internalize, the message, the information and values. So that's how it started with me. I was an art teacher, husband passed away, I didn't want to sell my comic, Sharon Archie, and went on to be a co-CEO, but used the Archie Rainbow to really propel the message of engaging people into information. And and one of the biggest topics is with our disability population, and helping on both ends get information across for inclusion.
Do you want to take a moment to tell us about the image behind you? And one of the things we're going to do is every time we have an image that's visual, we make a point of making sure that it's being described. And I hope that before I perish, that'll be something people just do without being reminded by me or anyone else, because it's not about me, it's about inclusion. So we have an image here of Scarlett, and would you like to describe Scarlett to us in the image, or would you like me to do that, Nancy?
I'd be happy to, but again, my background was school teacher. I had no business experience, no experience in publishing. But I didn't want to sell the stock, so I tumbled into Archie Comics with not, any plans. But it seems that what has followed me is my teacher's heart. So I utilize graphics to get information out. My first one was environmental issues, but what was always there was the autistic population in my school wanting to be included. So I said, I'm going to create a new character for Archie Comics, Scarlet. And I happened to be in the Philippines when I was launching Scarlet. And many people were raising their hands saying, when are we going to see more of us? You just created a new character, but when are we going to see more of us in your comics? And I said, as a publisher, I can make an edit. I can make an edit right now. Scarlet Salty is going to have roots from the Philippines. And then it expanded into a long story that I won't discuss here, but her mother's from the Philippines, her father is from Ireland, and Scarlet is very keen and skilled in building. She builds objects, but she also likes building ideas. But there's another thing about Scarlet. She desires friendships. She wants friends, but her social cues make that difficult for her because Scarlet is autistic. So Scarlet is a very diverse character, and it's allowing me to spark conversation on all these issues. So that is Scarlet behind you. When she started out, she didn't look that way, but her intellectual property keeps expanding, and it's all because of you, all of you. Just that conversation comes back to us at Archie Comics, and we put it right into our stories. So thank you.
Thank you. And so we have here an image of the character named Scarlet Salty, who has an excited expression on her face. She has greenish eyes and auburn hair in this image, and she's of medium complexion, biracial teenager. She's holding a pair of shoes that are red with yellow flowers. They look a little bit like cone flowers. It goes untied to the person who just sneezed. Go in good health. That's not part of the image description. Scarlet is wearing a Riverdale sweatshirt, a hoodie with a blue sweatshirt with an R partially showing in yellow. On the lower left-hand corner of the frame are the words Flower Feet, which is the cover of the comic, which is a digital comic, which will be available. If you want to get a copy of that, you can speak with Nancy, and she'll get your email address, and you can talk with her about getting a digital copy, which is now available for you. And Archie Comics issue number 3, it has the price in Canada, I think it's $2.50, someone correct me if I'm wrong, and $1.99 in the United States, and at the top it says Archie's Friend Scarlet. I want to note that there was involvement from a number of students and staff and faculty in different places in the country, and certainly the illustrators, Fernando Ruiz, and remind me the writer's name, Nancy?
The writer's name?
The other.
It's Dan Collins from Canada, but we have 3 stories, and another story was written by another person in New York, but with Jason Harris to my right here. Jason has been a consultant for me, providing some tweaks to the story. So I would say Jason has been instrumental in guiding the storyline to get it when I felt it was ready to be penciled by Fernando.
Okay.
So, and it was
Great.
colored by another individual in India. And so I feel, and lettered by a person in Canada. So Scarlet stories have an international flavor to them.
So if you didn't get it from the first set of layers, we have a biracial autistic character designed by global artists, writers, in collaboration with autistic cultural leaders and consultants. So that's a pretty great example of disability in comics. Does someone else want to comment on how they first made the connection between disability and comics? Who'd like to speak next or communicate next? Please, thank you.
Hello everybody, this is Leroy Moore from Crip Hop Nation. And my connection is I think totally different from some people because I'm a historian. So I realize that disability has been in all of our lives, from Moses to hip hop. So with that lens, I know disabilities everywhere, and I love music. I love hip hop. So when me and Keith put together Crip Hop Nation about 11 years ago, we knew that hip hop artists and hip hop artists with disabilities have always been in hip hop since the beginning. But because of the bling bling of hip hop, it never got to the mainstream. So in this comic book, I wanted to put a black young woman as a superhero. And and the story goes is that she gets more and more of her powers when she realized that crip hop is there. So she gets more confidence in her own ability because she's seeing herself. And not only that, in the book, there's also disabled hip hop artists that's been around since the 70s. For example, Cash 2 was the first graffiti artist in New York, and he had one arm. He lost his arm in the subway doing his artwork. So I put him in the book, and I also put on Rob Denoise Temple. He is the DJ of the Sugar Hill Gang, one of the first hip hop group. And Rob Denoise Temple has a disability and is a part of crip hop. So I go from the historic lens to comic. I wanted to bring that issue to youth and young adults. That it's not about inclusion. It's about we've been there since the beginning. So if you dig deep enough, you'll find the disability roots in everything, in hip hop, and comics, and anything. So yeah, so that's the avenue that I was looking at.
That's awesome, thank you. I'm wondering if you or Keith or both of you can talk a little bit about the Crip Hop Nation and the significance of the fact that this is a Crip Hop graphic novel, volume 1, or issue 1, which is going to be available at the University Bookstore's table outside in the lounge after this, and we'll have autograph stations set up, of course. But can you, because people might not be familiar with the Crip Hop Nation and its significance in the United States and globally.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Keith Jones, co-founder of Crip Hop Nation with Leroy Moore. And we're going to take and just give you a real quick synopsis. Leroy found me online 2003 through MySpace. So for those of you in the digital age, this is like last millennia. But what we have been doing, the reason Crip Hop Nation and the graphic novels are important is we've been doing hip hop since hip hop started. I've been doing hip hop since 1976. I listened to the first hip hop record not too far from here in Ithaca, New York. That should tell you something. I'm old as hell. But the reason it was important is because we had constantly found ourselves not represented in what we knew we were doing. As a disabled MC, as a disabled graphic designer, as a break dancer, there were a couple that you would see, but we were never fully embraced. So Crip Hop Nation really evolved out of a desire to get our stories out there, to get our music out there, to get the people, to get disability put in front of the issues. We are in the political season. Nobody's talking about disability. In the comic books, we're still fighting for representation in movies, we're still fighting for representation. If you think about Daredevil, his superpower is because he uses his audio capacity because he's lost his vision. What people don't talk about is the subtext that the larger society takes from a disabled superhero, depending on how that superhero is portrayed. Oh, he was great because he overcame his disability. In Crip Hop Nation, your superpower is your disability. It's the acceptance of your body image, your mental image, your sociological image, your human image. That's what Crip Hop really is designed to do, and we just make it look good and funky as we do.
You sure do.
And I want to say that Crip Hop is international. So we have chapters in Africa, UK, Canada, and a big thing that's coming out in July for Crip Hop, if anybody's going to be in the Bay Area, we're doing this all African disabled arts tour. So Crip Hop members from all over Africa is coming to the Bay Area in July, from Uganda, South Africa, Tanzania, all over. And it's huge because we do this on the SSI budget.
Yeah.
There's not a Ford Foundation grant. This is our money doing it. And you think that, Crip Hop is for, artists from Africa, believes in it so much is that they're coming here to do it. So it's a really big thing that we're doing this year.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to comment? We could probably spend the whole hour and a half just on this question, actually, and that's fine with me. So again, please comment on how you first came to make a connection between disability and comics. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Excuse me, my voice is not at its strongest right now, so I'm going to be quiet. But my experience connecting disability and comics actually came through my health condition, which is severe vocal pain. It comes from speaking, and I have yet to fully explain it either through the biomedical world or otherwise. And so I had the experience of pain, the change that was evident I needed to make in my life to try and address it. And then immediately a drive to tell that story through comics, because I love comics, and also because I could do it quietly and alone. So in writing and drawing and conveying that experience, trying to share with people this part of my life that I had previously taken for granted and that I could see reached and touched so many other lives and so many other ways of living. It was actually just over time that my condition did not improve, and that I realized I had to adapt my life in a indefinite sense, that I adopted not very comfortably the word disability, because some part of me feels like an imposter there. But definitely the term and the request for access needs, that for me, amplification, quiet spaces, silent conversations, writing utensils, all of these things are access needs that I have to communicating with other people. And it's something that comes and goes. I have some control over. I have some choice about how much pain I want to be in any given space. So I only, through making the comics and making the art that felt so natural to me, I will say the drive to make it was natural, but the making of it was very difficult. That was already happening, and then I was realizing, oh, this lens for looking at the world is extremely important to me, not only to make my life more possible, but because I have not been aware of all of the ways in which other people's lives are affected by not considering our differences. So it was more art-centric that I found my way through into this world.
Thank you, Georgia. And I want to apologize that Georgia's name is spelled incorrectly in a couple of places in the program, and my last name is spelled incorrectly a lot, so I really can't have any excuse for this, so I apologize publicly for that. And I was thinking, and I talked with Jason Pittman about this earlier very briefly, and I'm going to put Jason and Georgia on the spot for just a second, and everyone else. It connects with what we're talking about. And if you don't want to go here, that's okay, because I don't put people on the spot unless they're warned, which I just did. And if you're like, no, Diane, I don't care if we're on camera, we'll go somewhere else. It's totally cool, because I won't do something unless you're comfortable. But I noticed in reviewing my own experience of Dumb, which is the graphic memoir that Georgia wrote, and The War for Caleb, which is the graphic novel that Jason wrote, a very interesting parallel, probably worthy of a webcomic that maybe Lucy, who's a webcomic creator and graphic novelist, might help draw, and maybe eventually it'll wind up being characterized in Archie Comics, and perhaps it'll be performed by the Crip Hop Nation. I think I pulled it all together, and Jason and I will go dance. Okay, so Jason knows. So I'm wondering about the fact that in both of these images that are represented, there's, in the case of The War for Caleb, which is about negotiating the landscape of anxiety with which I have deep familiarity of my own, the character and his a version of himself, which is his anxiety, who looks like him, are at odds with each other, and in an embattled illustration, they're shown struggling, almost like two angels, if you're familiar with the tale from the Judeo-Christian story of the two angels and wrestling with Jacob. So, but also in Dumb by Georgia Weber, there's a sequence of Georgia and an aspect of Georgia, which is drawn in a different color. So there's the red and the black, and they're arguing. There's a kerfuffle between them where there's a full-blown fight, and there's smoke and mirrors, you know, and poof, and it's like one of those old-fashioned comics that has, you know, it almost looks like a pig pen from Charlie Brown with like the dirt flying in the air, you know, because they're really having it out. Like, do I want to have this disability? How do I live with this new identity? People keep asking me over and over again, what's wrong with me? Every single day I have to explain this, but I can't talk, like, back off, this kind of very complicated energy. But and in Jason's example, there's this, how much is my anxiety me? And who am I? And how much do I identify in terms of the disability? So I just was noticing that last night when I was having insomnia, which I've now said on camera, because I was worried about everything, but I'm all right now, because here we are. Hand for you, how about that? How about applause for yourselves? How about that? That was serious, why don't you do that? How about it, huh? Yeah? So I wanted to ask if you could think about what it's like for you to imagine specific examples from your current work regarding the connection between disability and comics. And for me, those are two very strong examples that happen to have distinctions and parallels between two works that I didn't even know I noticed until last night when I was up having anxiety. There you go, right? So are there any other examples that people can think of sharing, connecting your current work and the connection between disability and comics? So sort of deepening what we were just talking about. Anyone else want to comment?
Yeah, I'd like to comment. I think the Crip Hop graphic novel came out from seeing M.F. Grimm. If anybody's a hip-hop historian or hip-hop lover, M.F. Grimm was and is a hip-hop artist from the 80s. And he got shot like 10 times. This was way before 50 Cent. And now he's a wheelchair user. His graphic novel came out in 2007. It was the first hip-hop graphic novel with a disabled character himself. So when I saw that, I was like, wow, this is neat. So that changed my mind and really helped me to do you know, the Crip Hop volume. And also, I interviewed DNC, from Ron DNC, and in that interview, he told me that his first comic book deals with depression. So, and also DNC has a disability too. So those two really helped me to really put this book together. So yeah.
Could you quickly say something about the cover of the novel, Leroy, and why you have the Apollo Theater, and why this child or young lady or young person, whatever, I don't know how they self-identify, I want to be careful about that, but the character who seems to pass as female and may not call themselves a lady, I sure don't want to call myself that, but blah, blah, blah. What's up with her, and why is she depicted with that scene of guys on the street? Like, what's going on there? And tell people maybe a little bit about the significance of the Apollo Theater in Harlem.
Yeah, I wanted to put her as the main character because mostly in hip hop, in comics, you don't see a woman, especially a black woman with a disability, as the main character. So I wanted to interrupt that kind of thinking, and also Crip Hop has been doing a lot of visual arts, so we have a lot of paintings, and all the paintings that I've got so far is interrupting that male dominant voice in hip hop. It has women as a dominant voice. So she's, and her name is Roxanne. So if anybody knows hip hop, Roxanne was the first hip hop artist, first woman hip hop artist back in the, what?
This is 80.
Probably
82,
82, James. Yeah.
82. So I used her name as the character, and Apollo. Everybody knows Apollo as being, the Black Theater of New York. So I wanted to put her, under Apollo, saying that, disability is, a part of that history. And of course, she is surrounded by, men, and she's rapping. So once again, to interrupt that male dominant space as she's ripping the mic, and you look inside, her wheelchair turns into a deck, so she turns into the DJ scratch in, and she does graffiti. So she does all the 4 elements of hip hop.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think one of the things that's especially significant, I want to give a shout out to Gilles Stromberg, who's here in the audience, who's going to be doing a workshop later, Create Your Own Axis Avenger, Design Your Own Axis Avenger. And Gilles has been a panelist in the past, and I'm very glad and honored to call a friend as well as a colleague now working in admissions at our university and an alum of our university and formerly an employee at the LGBT Research Center when doing undergraduate work here. And Gilles, in working with Rachel Zibil-Ruggieri and I to create the Axis Avengers, our team of superheroes with disabilities, disabled superheroes, if you prefer identity first instead of person first language, so people with disabilities, superheroes with disabilities, disabled people, disabled superheroes. So the images all around the CripCon space today are set up so that you can meet visually, and there are image descriptions for them available online of each of our Axis Avengers. And we intended to undermine the sea of whiteness and the sea of masculinity in representations of comics. And so I think that this conversation is very, very dear to all of us for all kinds of reasons. Yes, go ahead.
Can I add one more thing?
Please.
And I'll be quick.
That's okay.
The introduction was written by an 11-year-old poet from New York. So she wrote the introduction, and once again, interrupting that male gaze. Yeah,
interrupting the male gaze is important, right? Indeed. I'll move on to another question, and I actually wonder in particular what, I know a lot about Lucy's collaborative expertise and some about Jason Pittman's and a fair amount about yours, Jason Harris, because of our collaboration. And also, I'm sure all of you have thoughts about this. So what is collaboration like for you, and why is it important? And if you could give an example or two as it relates to your work and obviously the theme of our Comic-Con, I'd be very grateful. So what is it like for you to collaborate, and why is collaboration important to you? And please give an example or maybe two. Anybody want to respond to that?
I've found that it really depends on the type of collaboration. The one that I'm doing right now is my webcomic, Cult of Bones, and one of the writers is here. He came with me. But it's nice to get so many different people's outlooks and like their creativity, and I really like including everyone's ideas, and it just makes for a more interesting story and more interesting artwork. I try to get guest artists to do different things too, and then I write the main thing. I also did another collaboration project that I wasn't in charge of, and I didn't really like how they were running it, so it really depends how much freedom you get, because I think the more freedom you have on a collaboration, the better it's going to turn out, because then everyone's having fun, and it's easier to be more creative. Yeah.
Thank you for your honesty. I appreciate that. And maybe we can talk off camera about our collaborations in the past as well. And I just, well, hold on one second. So I want to encourage all of you to visit Lucy's website, because you'll find many, many examples on that website of artistic and creative and literary production which highlight her commitment to this theme of collaboration, but also her own, your own style. So I'm going to just shamelessly plug all the people on this panel all day long, and so I think that's totally ethical. I'm not concerned about it. Every single person who is at this Comic-Con has been devoted to the cause of collaboration in one way or another. And I wonder if that also has to do with this idea we have from the disability rights movement of interdependence, right? So, you know, the myth of independence, which is kind of an American myth among other places. But I think artistic production is, in many respects, necessarily interdependent. And isn't that really what collaboration is? So does anyone else want to comment, thanks Lucy, on this idea of collaboration? Jason.
So, I mean, a lot of what I do is about collaboration, whether it's with, I mean, especially for comic books. I'm not a comic book writer or drawer because, well, I don't draw very well with dysgraphia, but also because, so, I mean, it has to be a collaboration because I'm not going to be the person who's actually doing that. But I do have a background of looking at media and disability, and also have a background in disability studies, and have been really interested. So it's been a great way to collaborate with somebody. But obviously, as Diane said, I try to collaborate a lot with a lot of different people because I think a lot of these ideas are really strong, but it comes stronger when you're working with people. And I think that a lot of advocacy is also about collaboration and working together, and a lot of advancing rights and doing things. And I think that's the way that humans have grown up as a species, however you want to say that, is through relying on each other and things. And I think that's an important part to understand. And it's a part of the way I also live my life, where there's things I do really, really well, but there's also areas I need help. And I think that's most people. That's not just disabled people or people with disabilities. I know my sister has support from her husband and and the rest of my family and people she works with. So I think sometimes we get this myth of independence and putting yourself up by the bootstraps. But I think, like what you said, it is again about having good collaborations, people who will listen to each other and help spark ideas, and it's a process, and that But it does give you a lot of really great ideas, especially as you keep growing and learning from each other and the people that then come in through that, like in situations like this where we'll get input from you as well. And it's great because I think that this is what moves things forward or sideways or whatever way, or even just moves it, because movement doesn't always have to be a thing either.
I could listen to you all 7 of you, like all day. So, we'll have plenty of time to be with each other. I'm so happy. So here I am on camera doing this again, but I'm like, wow, it's happening. Look, here it is, all this wonderfulness. So anyone else want to make a comment about collaboration, and then we'll move on to the next question?
Sure.
Keith, thank you.
This is Keith Jones again. Collaboration, Leroy and I have been collaborating for better part of a decade and a half, which is funny because he always sends me stuff and says, do it. And then I just have to turn around and give it back to him. He's like, I love it. And I'm like, all right. But the collaboration between artists is an energetic thing. It's really about a vibe. It's we're clicking on this thing. And it's good to get somebody's response back that's not based on your humanity. Because collaboration, being in society as a person with particularly if you have a disability that's visible, or even if you have a hidden disability, collaboration gets weird when people are not comfortable with your disability. Oh my God, Keith, is it okay if I talk to you? Well, you're talking to me now, so the answer would be yes. And so collaboration really, good collaboration can bring great things. And I think we see this as a reflection of this panel. Bad collaboration can kneecap a lot of things that we've tried to do. People want to, they don't necessarily collaborate, they seem to appropriate. Or they'll collaborate with you and then leave you nameless in the process. So I think a lot of the collaboration, particularly for the disability community, is how do we collaborate effectively without turning into inspirational porn stars? How do we collaborate effectively without being, oh my God, look, I have my crip accessory with me, the token crip. So I think the collaboration piece is really multifaceted. It's not just, are we really good artists together? Are we really good musicians together? Are we good poets? Are we really good humans together? Do we see each other's humanity first and then work out from there? That's really the essence of the good collaboration that I think this panel shows, but I think that we're trying to get through our art and our music, the rest of society to join us.
Do we honor each other's humanity? I love what you said. Thank you so much. Anyone else want to comment on collaboration before we move on to the next idea? Okay. So I have a question that has several parts, which is not that unusual for people who know me. Some people laughed at that joke. Okay, so please comment on one or more of the following. One or more of the following. So the first idea, you can comment on none of them also, or whatever you want. I'm down, okay? I'm bipedal for now, as I like to say. Not yet deaf, bipedal for now. There you go. The importance of diverse representations of disability in comics and their adaptations. Making comics accessible to many kinds of audiences through multiple modalities and approaches. The importance of disabled people making comics and adaptations and contributing to the industry. And students in my class will recognize these as the themes of the course, disabling comic books, which I've taught several times, and I'm teaching for the 4th time in the honors program this semester. And some of our students are here and have been running about and rolling about and helping, and thank you to all the students who are present. So can you comment on one or more of those? Anybody want to say something about that? Please, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's great to work with Nancy, and we have amazing collaboration, and that's one of the reasons I took up this when Nancy contacted. I run a Facebook and a website called Jason's Connection, and she contacted it because we have a bit of a following, so she wanted us to put it out there. And so I'd been talking about this quite a bit and sharing articles quite a bit about this, and it's something that as somebody who wanted to be, didn't want to just be saying things, but when given the opportunity, have a chance. So I wrote some comments, and you were really gracious to be able to listen and things, just because, obviously that's the way it should be in the industry, but it doesn't always happen. And so, but I think it's really important. One of the things is that I think a lot of disabled people or people with disabilities will ask, what characters do you recognize or represent with? And as far as autistic characters, I don't really see autistic characters that are officially canonized or been noticed. There's definitely ones that autistic people themselves say, oh, they look, or I think there's been a couple in anime and mangas that have been, but I don't read as many animes or mangas. But I generally see very one-dimensional, one-sided sort of way of sociality is sort of, oh, they're just awkward and they don't get it, but doesn't really match the way that I sort of move through the world, or other people I know who are autistic move through, because I've known and had a number of friends who are also autistic that didn't really represent that. And I think that's a general throughout most of the characterizations of disabled people and people with disabilities, is it's usually still used as more of a prop device or a learning tool or something that's more about the story itself rather than the person and the character. So that became really, really important when deciding to do this. I had a goal, and obviously I always thought that there was a great base for what Scarlett was as a character, but it seemed like a little bit similar to what I've seen in depictions and sort of younger than she was. So my goal, and luckily I think you've done a great job of keeping the character and evolving. It has started to change now. Scarlett seems like something that I would remember in high school, going to a place where it was an autistic high school, where people were autistic in high school, even though there was a little bit of its own dynamic. But I think that's been really important, and that drives sort of at least what I do in my work in general, but then also in the collaboration of this space. And yeah.
Thank you, Jason. Does anyone else want to comment on any of these three aspects? Everything's great. It's all great. There's no need to apologize. Yes, Leroy.
Yeah, I think I go beyond inclusionary, because like I said, we've always been there.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about some of comic characters that have disabilities is that it's an add-on, But if you go deeper and find the story, and weave that story into the character, it goes deeper than just inclusionary. I'm doing my next book is about Black disabled ancestors coming back to today, and I'm really speaking the truth of what happened to them back in their day and what should happen in the future. So the first story is going to be online. Is Jim Crow and Porgy and Bess the play. And a lot of people don't know that Jim Crow, the real person, had a disability, and his story was way out as far as way different than just a character. So for me, I wanted to bring the stories of disabled characters to not only comics, but to the mainstream, to movies. I'd love to get Michael B. Jordan to pick up, this comic books, because, like I said, it's the story. It's not the, flavor of the month add-on. Once you get into the story, then you're getting deeper into disability history and culture and you realize that, oh God, it's been there since day one.
Well, I think making people aware of that is pretty important, and that's one of the reasons why, whether 300 people come or 25 people come or, even 5 people come to the CripCon, whatever happens to it in the future, I think the conversation is deeply important and will continue. And it's obviously happens all over the world and all the places we roam, not just during the day when we're here together making company happen during our Comic-Con. So anybody else want to comment? Maybe someone who hasn't spoken for a while or hasn't spoken yet? Hint, hint, but no pressure. So the importance of diverse representations of disability in comics and their adaptations, making comics accessible to many kinds of audiences through multiple modalities and approaches, and the importance of disabled people making comics and adaptations of comics and contributing to the industry. Any comments? Yeah. You want a mic?
I have a mic.
You're mic'd? Okay. So-
Oh, it's
Yeah.
malfunction? Okay,
Okay.
so I will use this mic.
Okay.
When I started writing The War for Caleb, which is about anxiety, and it's partially about my anxiety, though it is fiction, began writing it as a way to, at the time I felt very alone, dealing with that all the time since I was like a child. I didn't know why. So I started writing a book about it to kind of come to terms and figure out why. And for no other reason, just that. But when I started writing it and the first issue came out, you sit there and you do this thing, and it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of energy, mentally, physically, emotionally. You think that I'm the only one like this, right? You ask yourself that constantly. And then when the first issue comes out, I started having people I didn't know, friends, family, come up to me and tell me about their own anxiety. A lot of people that I've known for a very long time, and I had no idea. So one of the things that I thought was really great was that, one, it made me finally not feel alone. It gave me people to talk to, people to connect with and whatnot with the whole anxiety deal. Having everybody come up to me or other people tell me that I finally feel like somebody got me. Like I had a person after the Kickstarter was done, the books went out, and an older, I guess a person about my age, he bought the book and he wrote to me and told me that he left it for his son who has anxiety, and he said that his son wrote it and he started crying because he said that he finally felt like somebody got him, and I don't know, I think that's important, I think that it's important that people understand that. We sit in our silos. We all, we deal with our problems, and particularly in this country, I think, with the way that mental illness or physical disability is treated, it's like, I don't know, they want to not pay attention to that. They want us, I feel like sometimes they want us to feel like we're alone, but I promise you we're not. And I think that's probably the most important thing about this representation and why we make these books, why we make this art. I mean, that's the whole point of storytelling anyway, in my opinion, is to find those connections with people or fictional characters that we just go, oh wow, I get it, I mean, I'm like a huge Star Wars fan, and like just in the recent years I found out. I mean, I analyze those movies to an unhealthy. I don't want to say unhealthy.
That's debatable.
I think it's healthy.
It's
yeah.
healthy,
Yeah.
yes.
But
Quote unquote
I came to the
unhealthy.
conclusion that Anakin Skywalker has separation anxiety.
Yes.
And that's why he turned to the dark side. That's sad.
Wow.
You know.
Wow.
Just think about that for a second. Darth
Right.
Vader had separation anxiety, and because he felt he was alone,
Right.
he destroyed the universe. So don't tell everybody that you're not alone, I guess. You know, I think that's very important. That's the moral of the story. Don't become Darth Vader. Don't be alone.
Okay.
Please, let's get a mic over
So
here.
I'll
Thank
give you a little behind the scenes, storylines with Archie Comics. When I had met Archie Comics is a family business run by two families, Goldwaters and Silverclites, and my husband was single and looking for a partner. And I remember it was a magazine where he put an ad in. It was no, Match.com way back then. I'm a senior citizen now. I think it's been a week. It was a
Mazel
long
tov.
time ago that I had met my husband. But when I met my husband, the teacher was at the table again. And I was appalled how, I would see one of our characters, Moose, with that duh moment. I was appalled by that. Because Archie Comics was a platform for people to dive into those panels to see themselves. And I didn't want anyone seeing themselves with that duh moment. And I mentioned to my husband that, what if you gave Moose, dyslexia? Because I myself had trouble reading. And I had been retained. I had been left back. And I remember when I was left back how people, use those verbs, dumb, stupid. But it wasn't dumb or stupid. It was that no one had provided me information in the way that I could connect with reading, that would want me to read. So the same thing with anyone. And Moose is anyone. So I didn't want to see that dumb moment, explain why he has difficulty with Miss Grundy giving information, because no one had figured out he had dyslexia. So I was so proud that my husband had taken that conversation that just happened at a dinner table and gave that idea to the writers. So, Moose no longer had that duh. There was an explanation, and for people to see themselves in the comic book. Comic books are powerful because people can see themselves on those platforms. So putting out stories like you did, gives somebody, wow, I'm not alone. And I thought that was powerful for Archie Comics.
Thank you for sharing your experience as well. And I think a lot of us in this room come from this place of how it reflects not just on our interests because of some idea that's lofty, but because it has a personal connection, either through our own experience or the experience of a family member or friends or some combination. So I appreciate that. I really appreciate it.
I haven't learned what I have. I probably have dyslexia, ADHD, and who knows what else, Diane.
Can you repeat from the beginning if you don't mind, so that we
I
have
said,
it on
and
the
I still
captioning?
don't, I have not been tested, but I'm sure I have a slew of things where I could have gotten qualified for extra time. It's something that I need. And you, Diane, have been very patient with me. We've had many emails, and I just love how you always, and that's what people have to do, is have the utmost patience to get to know someone. You're always teaching me that, Jason. That's a very important thing, is to get to know a person. And what was said here is honor one's humanity. So it takes a lot of patience.
Thank you for saying that. So I guess dignity is really the bottom line in a way. But unfortunately, I think, so I've been very careful since we are on camera. I've said very many things already, perhaps I shouldn't have said on camera, but I just want to point out, without naming any names, in the cultural moment in which we find ourselves, that not only is it the case that some people are saying actively, we don't want to have representations of diversity in comics, And of course, this is ridiculous because, as has been highlighted numerous times, especially by Leroy, we've been here from the beginning, if you've all been paying attention. And also, we don't want to have specifically representations of disability in comics. It's going to ruin the industry. So I'm not going to mention the name of any particular organizations, but you can ask me off camera and I'll tell you. And it's really alarming to me, the prominence that some of these groups are starting to have. And the reason that Rachel and I, in conference with Huey and Kate and others in creating this year's CripCon, decided to call it "And Justice for All" is not just a reference to the Justice League, of course, and it's not just a reference to egalitarianism or fairness or equity. It's a reference to this group of people who are multiplying, who really do think that we're annoying and should be out of the way because we should have just Superman, you know, but technically Superman's disabled, actually. What? Well, let's talk about this. We're going to have Q&A with the audience in just a few minutes. What on earth is she, they, Diane talking about? Why did I say that? Why did I say that Superman's disabled? Now, I'm not sure how Superman self-identifies. I don't want to be intrusive to Superman, okay? I read Superman and think Superman is a disability. So one more question, and then we're going to open it up to. Why what? You want to talk about this now? You want to talk about this right now? Okay, we're going to go here right now. Here, I'm bringing. Can I bring you a microphone? Can I bring you a microphone? Okay, so I'm going to repeat what you're saying, though. So you're saying, why do I think that Superman is disabled? So I'm going to throw it back to the panel. Does anyone find persuasive this idea? Why am I saying that? Yes, go ahead.
I had a comment.
Go right ahead, go right
I
ahead.
had a comment about the last question.
Please.
Not Superman.
That's okay, we can, whatever we need.
I'm not quite fond of Superman.
Well, I was being ironic, that's what I said, right, indeed.
I didn't start realizing, yeah, okay. I didn't start looking at disabilities in comic books or other medias until a few years ago when I asked for help myself with my manic depression. And then I started writing comics about the hallucinations of monsters that I was seeing and everything. And I put those into comics so they would seem less scary to me. And then I made one into a short story and I got really positive feedback. And then I made it into a comic. And then I kept it to myself. And then a few years ago, one of my English professors gave me Marbles by Ellen Forney, and she really changed my outlook and made me not feel alone. And that really made a big difference to me, so I'm happy that other people are also writing and drawing about it. I also think it's important that disabled people are making comics and media because I find that a lot of it is being portrayed wrong. Mm-hmm. In particular, I'm starting to not like horror movies as much because they portray like manic depression, bipolar, and schizophrenia incorrectly, and they're always like the villains, not the victims, and I think that's very wrong, and I think more people need to be aware and corrected how it actually feels to be one of those people instead of portraying them as monsters just because they're different.
What if we started the Monster Union? You know, we
got
could
you.
be like a team of artistic consultants with cross-disabilities perspectives, and we could ask to be compensated instead of
Yes.
exploited by industries. And, you know, we could just have like a whole menu of accessible options, you know, that you could access in an array of ways. Of course, the website would be screen reader friendly, obviously, come
Yes.
on, right? And then we could, I'm not kidding, actually, like this is an interesting, this panel could do that. Many people in the audience. So, that's your dream job? Okay, well, it could happen here today, it could start, and I'm not kidding. So,
No,
Sarah, I
I've,
think, go ahead, Jason, yes.
Me and Kate had that conversation over Facebook once, whether like animal type or like ghost, paranormal, horror movies could happen without portrayal of disabled people being a human, like as a human sort of centered, like psycho or like some other type of movie without like mental health disabilities or physical or even sort of, you know, I mean, you have like ones like Jason Voorhees, who would be maybe seen as somebody with an intellectual disability. Like, if it's possible to even have a horror movie genre that has human characters as horror antagonists without that wouldn't have any disabilities, if that's possible.
Yeah.
Would you be comfortable running a mic for me?
Capable of being evil and doing horrible, creepy things without having disabilities. So.
I would agree. Oh yeah.
And you know, technically, you could.
So if you speak off mic, it's not going to be captioned, so just give me 1 second and someone can come over and give you a mic. Go right ahead.
Technically, you could have like a you could have like that you're the hero of your horror movie is mentally ill and the villain's also mentally ill, so it just like I mean, because that would kind of balance things out, I guess.
Okay, so what I want to do now is open it up. We do
I don't know.
have.
I mean, I thought it's kind of. I mean, because it would kind of balance things out and show how like people that are different can be just as bad as people that aren't different, but they also can be good too because we're just like anyone else. So if the hero was mentally ill and they were good, but the villain was also mentally ill and bad, but not because they're mentally ill, because of other reasons that or whatever, and the hero's good, it'd be sort of like interesting because it shows that people are different. I mean, some people are bad and some people are good, and it's not because they're gay or bi or transgender or non-binary or disabled. It's because they were good or bad or whatever. I think that would be an interesting thing to see, I guess. I know that sounds kind of dumb, but yeah. Or you know, they could be an evil serial killer that's not mentally ill, and they're just freaking a serial killer who kill people, and they're not mentally ill. They just kill people because they want to kill people, or they have some other reason.
So
I don't know.
I'm going to ask the panel to respond to you, okay? And we have some other comments and questions. Thank you very much. And is there another microphone? I think there's another microphone, so I could have it floating around the room. Again, I don't know if Ralph is still present, but it would be great if we could get another microphone.
Well, I just, this is Keith Jones. Going back to everything that's just been said, and then we'll get the questions from the audience. When you talk about representation, disabled people, I think people really forget that disability is not a monolith, and that identities are mosaics, not flat. One of the biggest things about representation, particularly for people of color with disabilities, is that you're quicker to see a white disabled person on television or as a superhero or as a genius, even the villain, before you'll see a person of color with a disability, whether hidden or not. In terms of representation, I'm old enough to remember when we got excited about the Cosby Show being on TV because, oh, look, black people, and we not killing each other, and we got jobs, and we actually are an intact family, which was what we knew, but what we had never saw. And when we get to people with disabilities, I think it's not to request that we be included shortchanges our power. To demand that we be included is to abdicate our power, do it ourselves. It's harder. A lot of people will say, no, we don't want to see you because disability is what challenges people's mortality. That's why people always go, oh, you're so strong, you're so amazing, because in the back of their mind, they're going, but for the grace of God, that would be me. And they see you, because look, as much as I get praised, I must be a superhero for the stuff that I'm doing, like going to get coffee, you know, eating basic stuff. But I think in terms of how we talk about it via comics or superheroes, everybody was so surprised about Wakanda Forever. Every black person on the planet was screaming with Wakanda Forever. I'm still shouting Wakanda Forever. But the reason it was important was not because it was just black, was because it was not filled with negative tropes.
Yeah.
There was not negative representation. Brilliant, completely high-minded, and I think people with disabilities, we have yet to get that on a consistent basis
Oh, yeah.
in our own representation.
Oh, yeah.
So I know we have a question or two more from folks here in the room, and we also have a question or two from people who are live streaming with us. So thank you for running the mic, rolling the mic, and I'm going to let you do that.
I think this gentleman.
Yeah.
I want to tell us why Archie Comics has changed the way it did today. They show real people with horror and everything now. Tell us about that.
Well, in 1941, when Archie Comics was started, again by two families, John Goldwater Sr. and Louis Silverclight, my father-in-law, that I never got to meet, they saw that there were no comic books for girls. So they wanted to create this platform where they could start bringing in females to the comic book world. So that's kind of how it started. But the formula was to have kids in a high school with a little bit of conflict, let the kids work it out without any adult intervention, but very important, always reflect the decade. And that brings us up to today. The Archie comic formula is still the same. It's just not that slapstick, laugh fun that you take away that we're seeing on Riverdale. They are bringing in what society is dealing with today. It's very dark. You're talking about that horror. I was talking more about Riverdale, which is very dark and horror and killing. So that's just that Archie formula. We still make the classic comics with those fun, loving stories, but we are also a business, and we need to sell, and we see what connects people to our property, and they like that dark horror. So it's just really understanding what people like, and our Generation Z and all those other young kids enjoy that darkness. So it's really just seeing what people like, but the formula was reflecting the decade. And I love the scene in Riverdale where they introduced that drug. It was a fictional drug, Jingle Jangle, but that show allowed you to spark conversation on drugs. Do you think I could call up my 28-year-old daughter and say, hey, do you do drugs? What's your thought on drugs? She'd say, Ma, I gotta go. Click. But I called her up and I said, did you see that show on Riverdale, Jingle Jangle? What's that? I said, oh, they introduced a drug. She goes, oh, what happened? And da-da-da-da. And I said, it was, putting pressure on, Archie and Betty, and, what do you think happened? And she says, well, that's what I used to do. I would go into another room when peer pressure was trying to get me to use drugs. I saw it happening, and I went into a room, and I went, yes. So I had I got to hear what I wanted to hear, and it was a true conversation. So I feel the show is very dark, but it's allowing people to have conversation on these tough issues. So I know we came out with, comic books with, the horror ones and the real people. Yeah, but that's, just what people like to read. So, we have to keep going. We're going to be 80 years next year. So we see what. Did you enjoy it?
Yes.
Good.
I read it, yes.
Good.
I got a big collection.
Good.
So the person off mic is saying they enjoyed them and read them and has a big collection.
So thank you.
So I think we have a couple of more questions. I know that we have a question from someone who's not physically in the room or present otherwise. And I just wanted to highlight that we'll have workshop sessions from 1:30 to 3:30. Nancy Silverclight's workshop session is 1:30 to 2:30. And so you'll have a chance to continue these conversations in some of those ways. So we'll have in your program, we have digital versions, of course. We have large print versions, and we have the other print that are in the swag bags that you all should have received, and with your communication badges when you arrived. So I think we have a question from someone. I don't know where they are, but I know that Sajid is going to read it to us. So here's the
This is a question for Dan. Were you referring to Superman's powers as a disability of sorts that sets him apart from the norm, while yet the Clark Kent persona is a way for him to try to fit in and study the human factor from another point of view?
Well, thanks a lot, person who's asking me that, and that's really cool. And I think what I want to do is bring it to the panel, since we started to have a conversation earlier about whether or not Superman was disabled. And again, I don't know how Superman self-identifies, so we don't want to speak on behalf of Superman. Okay, but does anyone have thoughts about what does it mean to read disability into these popular representations from the 30s, from the 40s, from the 50s, the so-called silver age, the so-called golden age? I mean, does anyone have any comments? I have my opinions about Superman. Anyone else want to comment, though? Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, I'll jump in head first. Superman, if you go back to old comics, even if you go back to old Bugs Bunny, all the Saturday morning cartoons we grew up with, there's a lot of hidden references to things that society did not like, i.e. transsexual, bi, LBGTQ, I hope I got it right. But also, even within the black community, as you remember, like whenever the bomb would go off, and Tom and Jerry, they'd blow his face back, he'd be black, and his hair be standing up. That was in reference to African Americans being called pickaninnies. Or with the big bubble lips was again the coon and the step and fetch it. So representation now in terms of Superman, I can actually Superman is like perfect for now. He's an illegal immigrant that landed, got adopted by a white family, was given a white identity, and told to hide his true nature. Or he'd get deported by ICE. So, does he have a disability? You could say that. He has an environmental disability because his physiological makeup changes based on his environment. And if people don't know about environmental terrorism or environmental racism, communities of color suffer from large health disparities because they are exposed to environmental factors. So I can see how Superman would be a person with a disability because of his environment.
Thanks very much. Jason, did you want to add something? Thank you, Keith.
Yeah, I think that another way that I sort of noticed it is if you saw the movie Man of Steel, which I think was, some of it when the beginning of the movie where he's hearing everything and sort of seeing everything is a really interesting depiction, I think, of sensory overload and sort of sensory things and sort of how that also comes with in other parts of somewhat being, it can be with someone to being autistic is not about necessarily overcoming it, it's learning to live with it and use it in some ways for that it's not necessarily a negative either, that it's using what you have and finding a way to exist in the parts, but also that it can be powerful in its own way, not to super, because I know that's a critique in the market is the super crip, and I don't want to be using that trope, but I think there is some interesting ways to dissect it that's a little bit more holistic.
Jason, can you tell us what's a trope for people in the room who may not know? Because we have people, of course, who access information in so many different ways, including children who are here. What's a trope in your own words?
Yeah, trope is something that it tends to be sort of something that's reoccurring that is based on it can be based on prejudice or an idea that it has to, or it can be, and it tends to reoccur, and it tends to at that point just become, like if you've seen a film, you know it's going to be, it's going to be this type of film or that type of character's going to be that type of way because it tends to reoccur, and there's not really a diversity about the representation of that, whether it's a situation or a person or...
So kind of like, thank you, so kind of like earlier we were talking about villains, and the villains are often depicted as having mental illnesses, and we were critiquing that, and someone in the audience said, well, what would happen if the hero had a mental illness and then the anti-hero or the villain had a mental illness? That would play a different kind of narrative out, or a different story would come out of that than would otherwise be the case. I think we have time for one more question. Do we have anyone else who wanted to ask a question?
This one is more for Mr. Jones or Mr. Moore. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Like, okay, yeah, okay. Obviously, hip hop and comics have been in conversation since the beginning, but you were talked about how difficult it is to do work without it being appropriated.
Yes.
And I'm thinking also of like the Marvel variant comic lines of hip hop covers that weren't done by black artists.
Yes.
So considering like mainstream culture's love of appropriating black culture and appropriating these disability narratives, how do you navigate being in the mainstream, or do you just decide not to do that at all? And can you share some thoughts on that?
You want to go first?
Oh, sure. All right, I'll take. Well, I guess to be fair, we have to put in the historical context first, and the societal context first. As a person of color in this country, everything has been appropriate. From Jack Daniels, right, to peanut butter, to the traffic light, to the light bulb, to fashion. If I see another Instagram white girl talking about she got boxer braids, I'm going to scream. But how do you navigate without being appropriated really comes down to your core values. The reason crip hop has survived for a decade plus is not that people don't, because we held true to this. We would love large, I ain't mad at Marvel from $1 billion, give me $1 billion, I'm cool, right? But the problem is, how, as an artist, regardless of where you're from, how do you maintain the integrity of your art? How do you maintain the true vision of it without the soul of it being corrupted? And when it comes to being a person of color, the question is not really a bifurcated question about being culturally relevant versus commercially successful. I think you dance that line when you start to try to be commercially successful at the expense of being culturally relevant and real and true to your roots. The reason we have done this for so long is because even within the black community, disability gets zero love, right? Like everybody was screaming Wakanda forever, Wakanda forever. Then they look at me in the wheelchair like, really? Right? So how do we negotiate it? It's really just maintaining the integrity of the vision, maintaining the integrity of the mission and what the meaning is behind the work. The meaning behind crip hop is says our tagline, it's more than music, because it is more than music. The reason we do a graphic novel is because they don't see anybody like us in the books. The reason we try to do the music, nobody hears us on the radio. The reason we do the comics, nobody sees our superheroes. The reason we do the poetry, the paintings, is not because we are just rebels, which we are, but it's because people have never seen the value in the disability community as just people. They've always seen us as a burden or a crisis, or in particular cultures, we're seen as a curse on the family. So so with that, take all that baggage, turn it into something creative, and maintain your possession of it, really boils down to how hard are you willing to fight to keep the integrity, and how much are you willing to give up in order to maintain that integrity?
So I'm going to make a decision here, which I hope is okay with everybody, because we started a little late because we had the multiplicity of access moments. We were trying to make well, I'll say it that way, and I think we did. So consequently, given that we're in what's called crip time, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to ask if you'll oblige one more question, because I noticed that someone had... Well, but one second, hold on one second. So the person who had the question is right in front of the person who's going to bring the mic.
Thank you. I was really interested in a question that was asked earlier and didn't get answered about alternate formats for comics, because I'm visually impaired and I'm a massive nerd and watch lots of movies and read lots of books, but don't read comics because pictures. And I know some webcomics have transcripts that visually impaired people can access, and so I'm just wondering if any of you have experience producing that, or if you haven't, if you might consider it.
Thank you for asking that question, because I was at a school in Fort Lee, New Jersey, and whenever anyone asks a question, I require that they have a mic and come up and speak. So there was a girl way in the back. I call on her, and she's coming up, and I see she has a walking stick. She was blind. And her question to me was, are Archie comics, are comic books created in Braille? And I said, I've never been asked that. That was about, I think about 5 years ago. And I said, but I'm going to do everything I can do, because the comic books I've been speaking about today, I'm going to see how I can get them in Braille to you. So thank you. And that's what I did. And I just threw it in my bag before I got on the plane.
Wow.
So I was there talking about an environmental story, because we're all part of the environment and all involved in trying to do our best, especially with single-use plastic, trying to reduce our use of it. So I was able to getting drastic with plastic and Braille, and I can tell you, if there is a comic book you want to read, you can get it done in Braille. This did cost me some money, but I think there's other ways to get it done less. And I wondered, how did the story, how was it enjoyed? Because there is a lot of visuals that, you know, cannot be explained, but I guess it was done the best they could when this story was created. And the young girl said she enjoyed it and she wanted another one. So I brailled one that I did out of my foundation on what one can do when bullied. So I feel any comic book can be brailled.
Yes.
And if you read Braille, you know, come see me later, because I have it here with me, and you can take some time and look through it.
And does
Thank
anyone
you.
have experience with webcomics and other means? That's excellent. Thank you so much, Nancy.
But I think we had another.
And other answers. Yes, please, of course.
Yeah, I don't have experience with webcomics and making them accessible to people with various levels of vision. But I would like to hear from you maybe later if you're interested to talk, because I'm currently working on a project with a blind woman who approached me to finish a graphic novel that she started as her vision was deteriorating. So what's interesting there is that she will never see what I make. The mass production that we will be using, the publisher who's agreed to put it out, doesn't have the means or the time at this point, because there's another time restriction on getting this done, to produce it entirely with as many accessible features as we can manage. So we're trying to create either a companion as like an introduction to the book or the concept that can be done with other considerations. But ultimately, the book itself will just not be something that she can consume, at least not in its printed format. And for that smaller version, I am actually interested in extending beyond the Braille as a possibility for engaging with this. You know, it's essentially going to be 2 short stories, I think, like maybe 20 or 30 pages to accompany a 200-plus page graphic novel. And I'm just reaching for every different mode of accessibility, because I know for her especially, she can't read Braille. She went blind in her 20s, and she just has not captured that language learning. So then I'm trying to think about how people who can't read Braille could still engage with this. And it comes down to, I mean, there are so many different tools accessible to us. Like, I can make my text in the comics much larger. I can use really big words. I can make the words pictures themselves. If I have the option in the smaller format of doing something textural, I can change the paper. I can change the media that it's printed in. I can add, you know, dips and raised moments just so that someone could like experience the book in touch. And then I can also make descriptive versions of it so that those can be companions to one another. Someone could be listening to something while also touching the paper and moving the pages and reading the Braille if it's there. So I'm exploring all of this now just because I really feel versatility of comics is not limited to its visual aspects. And I want to explore all of those things for this person who I'm collaborating with now in a very challenging topic and challenging experience for both of us, because much of the time I can't speak to her, or I can't speak to her as much as I would like to relate her story to me. I can't have those conversations because my voice, I can't use that extensively or in long sessions. And then she, you know, once I've taken what she would like me to do and what I'm writing into it of my own interpretation, I can't actually deliver it back to her for verification that it is true or that it feels right. So we then have like other people who are describing for her, who know her, who are the bridge between us, who she has a trusting relationship with, who I can create a relationship with through the visuals now. So I'm very curious about feedback on all of those ideas, because it's just new explorations for me, and a huge range of consideration that I had never, it had never occurred to me before, that now I'm trying to take as deeply as I can.
Well, I really think this is a wonderful conversation, and we're not going to have time for another question, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Hold on. No, 1 second. Just let me just hang on 1 second. I promise I'll get to you in just a sec. So what I think we need to do is pause, and I think I accidentally hit the slide that advances to hieroglyphics, which was part of imagery that Nancy Soberclyde had considered sharing. And I don't think that's a total coincidence, because in fact it's a tactile example of imagery. I don't really know what to say, except serendipity seems to have happened to us. But what I'd like to do is acknowledge the panel and all of you here in any way you feel comfortable or able to do so. Okay, so thank you. One second. And what we're going to do is we're going to have an autograph session. And if you want to ask a question, you can approach the people at the panel at the autograph session. So I'll invite everyone to go outside into the main area, and we'll have some autographs, and you can pause and mingle and say hello to one another. Thank you very much.